Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the sewing studio. Now you may have seen this quilt before because it was on the desk in front of us when Katrina and I did the YouTube live back at the beginning of the year. And one of my goals for this year is to get this quilt finished. Now at that point I think I just had the centrepiece done. So I actually have managed to add 2 borders. Not a lot of progress, but all progress is good progress, isn't it? So I thought I would share this with you now because I'm just about to layer it up and quilt it and get it finished. But I thought I'd share it with you now because this matches in to the Noughts and Crosses quilt that we did recently. There were actually 2 quilts I did as a pair. Now this is actually the second version of this I've done. The first one I gave away to my sister because she really liked it, or one of my sisters, she really liked it. And I wanted to recreate it in the same colours again, and it took me a little while to gather all the fabrics again because this is all made completely from scraps with the exception of the background, which I think was a piece of fabric I had in my stash anyway. But most of this just came out of my 2.5-inch box. And even this fabric was a remnant. It was an offcut from another quilt that I'd done. So this all came from stash. And like I said, this is all sort of a very scrappy quilt. Now I call it my Facets quilt because these little shapes here remind me of the sort of facets that you get cut into sort of gemstones and things. But I really love it. It's a really nice sort of bright, cheerful one and very summery, so perfect for sort of this time of year. So I thought I would just talk you through some of the key features of this. I've got 56, I'm checking that in my head, blocks. It's made up of 2 blocks. I'm going to show you the blocks here. It's this snowball block, and if you remember, that's one of the blocks we did in the Noughts and Crosses quilt. So it's the same 2 blocks, and also then a 9 patch. And all that's different in this quilt is where we put the colour to make the blocks look different. So, and this was a workshop I did many years ago demonstrating that point, saying actually if you can make one of these quilts, you can make both of them because it's the same block, it's just a little bit different colour placement. So these finish at 6 inches because we're using 2.5-inch pieces. And I'm going to show you a different technique, a slightly different technique of how we actually make the snowball block, in particular in this one, which is a slight difference to how we did the Noughts and Crosses. We did all that one from squares. And I know there was one comment in the YouTube saying, oh, I thought it uses a jelly roll. Where was the jelly roll? Well, the 2.5-inch squares were cut from the jelly roll. So that's where the strips came from. But this method, we use strips. So it'll probably be a little bit more obvious where the strips come in on this one. But the 2 techniques are interchangeable. So you can use this technique to make the Noughts and Crosses block, or the Noughts and Crosses technique to make this quilt. Now the other difference of this is obviously the layout. In the Noughts and Crosses we did an on point or a diagonal setting, and this is just your traditional horizontal and vertical rows, so it's a much simpler setting. I added a 2.5-inch wide strips for the borders, the first border, and then this outside border was a 5.5-inch strip, and I just made that the size that I could cut from the fabric, the piece of fabric I had left, so I managed to get 5.5 inches from that. As it stands at the moment, this quilt is measuring 56 by 62. I was going to get that the wrong way round. 56 by 62. So there's an extra row. It's 7 by 8, I think. So 56 blocks in total. I think I said that earlier. So I think that's all I need to take now for anybody, because I'm sure we're going to get a question that says, how much background did you use? And to be honest, I don't know, because it was a piece of fabric that was in my stash and I didn't measure it before I began, but I would estimate it was probably about a 2 or 2.5 metre piece of fabric. And just one top tip, I cut my borders when that piece of fabric has still got the length on it, so that I don't have to piece this first inner border. So I will cut strips parallel to the selvage, so in the same sort of direction as the selvage, and I cut those off the background first, so I know I've got some nice long strips to get into the quilt. Now if your quilt, the centre of your quilt is less than your 42 inches, which we can get usually usable piece off a width of fabric, you don't have to worry so much. But certainly when it comes to sort of longer lengths, I'll cut some pieces off my long length of fabric first, and then I know I don't have to sort of put any pieces into the border. It's just a sort of preference of mine that I don't particularly want to see sort of seams, particularly in a pale coloured fabric. So, you know, it depends how you quilt it, but certainly for me, if I can get one continuous strip in a border, I will tend to do that if I can. So should we go and see how we make the blocks? So we're going to start with the 9-patch block. Now, one of the tricks that I used with the scrappy quilt is I was consistent with my colour placement so that it actually sort of brought it together and sort of looked a bit more consistent rather than just having lots of sort of different colours everywhere. So for my 9 patches, I've got my 2.5-inch squares here. Like I say, many of these have come from my 2.5-inch box. For those that haven't heard me talk about that before, anytime I'm cutting fabric, if I've got a little piece left, rather than that going into my scrap bin, if I can get a 2.5-inch square out of it, I will cut 2.5-inch squares. And I keep it all in one container. And when that container starts to get too full, that's my prompt for, right, Jeanette, you need to use up some of your 2.5-inch squares. But because I knew I was doing this and collecting these colours, I've been sort of setting those aside for this quilt over quite a long time, so that I had enough to do the number of blocks I wanted to do. So for the 9-patch, I put a red square in the centre, and you'll see that from the quilt behind me. All the 9-patch blocks, I've got a red square in the centre. And then sort of the aqua or sort of more tealy coloured fabrics go in the 4 corners. And then my background will just go in between. And then we're just going to assemble that like a 4-patch. So I'm just looking for I think that's feeling like that's the rougher side. I think they're all upside down. I think if I put them all in upside down, it shouldn't matter. But sometimes I can notice if one looks slightly different than the others, it's generally I've got it in upside down. So we're just going to put that together as a 9-patch. And I have just pulled in these blocks because these are the ones that we did for the Noughts and Crosses quilt. And you'll see we made the 9-patch in exactly the same way, but it's the colour placement here that's different. So this was the block that went in the Noughts and Crosses quilt, and this is the one that's going into this Facets quilt. So we've got sort of colour in sort of the 5 areas, and that bit is the background, whereas here we've got the background with the colour going through the cross. All right, so I just wanted to sort of compare and contrast so you can see what the difference was with this. So I'm going to take all of these, put right onto left, and take them to the sewing machine. I've got my other pieces here. This is really nice, wide working space. So I should keep saying we've had a new machine here in the studio, and it's the Jeanette Memory Craft 9480 QC Professional. So it sews really fast. Which I really like. I tend to sew fast, but that's not the only reason I like it. I do really like it, but I'm just getting used to it. So I'm pressing all the seams. I'm just finger pressing them for now, and I'm pressing them all towards the dark fabric, the contrast fabric, or away from the background is another way of saying that. And then once we've got that, we can put those rows, and because we've gone towards the darker fabric, all these seams should now nest. And all I do is just sort of give them a little bit of a smush together. And that's how that's coming together. And we're just going to put our bottom row on. So there we are, that's our 9-patch block all done. So I'll take that to the iron and give it a press in a moment once I've made the other block, and then we'll do all the pressing all at the same time. So all of the blocks look like that. So the 4 teal ones or aqua colours in the corners and my red in the centre. And just once again, we'll just bring in that other one so you can see the difference between, that's the Noughts and Crosses quilt and that's the Facet, but they're both using that 9-patch block. So let's have a look at this one. So this was the block that we did for the Noughts and Crosses. So this is the snowball block. And we did that all in individual pieces, but I'm going to show a different way, which we could have, and if I put it like that, we could have done like that on this block. And for this one, we're going to need 2 strips that are 2.5 by 6.5. and then 4 2.5-inch navy blue I've used for the corners for these, and we're going to use those to snowball them. And then this is the blocks that go into the centre, so 2 2.5-inch squares of background and a 2.5-inch square. And on my snowball blocks, all the centre blocks were this sort of teal or aqua colour. So that's how I got the consistency in making sure, and all the snowballed corners were done in a navy blue or a dark blue. So that's how I got the consistency in this. So we're going to just pin that one because we can sew that seam. And then we can put that to the machine. That's the one that needs to go onto there. And then while we're at the machine, we'll get our navy blue. We're going to draw a line from corner to corner. Ooh. Make that a bit darker, Jeanette. Can't quite see that. Can't tell the difference on that one. I think that's the rougher side. I think I can see that. So on these, the snowball, the corner's going to go out like that. So I'm just going to match. Let's put that one there. Hold on, that's wrong. Yep, that's right. So once again, the diagonal lines need to come up to the centre. So I'll put a pin there. And a pin there. And then we're just going to stitch just on the outside of those lines to snowball those corners. So let's take all of that to the machine. So that's our centre row, so we'll just set that to one side for a minute. Now the tip, it's easier to come in from this flat side than trying to start on the corner with these. Now we're just going to check, let's grab our ruler, that we're happy with these. So once again, I'm just going to fold that back and just make sure that I'm happy with that fabric coming up to the corner, and I am. So we can grab our rotary cutter, take those off. I better just check those. Yep. Yep. So let's just give those a press. Now once again, before I put the block together, I'm just going to check that these have stayed at the right size, because that method of putting on your corner triangles isn't a 100% accurate one. Now I've got a little bit of trimming to do there and a little bit there. I mean, it literally is just minute bits, but they make a difference. So the more accurate we can make our units, the easier our blocks come together. So now we can attach those to our centre block. If I bring it in and just show you how it goes together. So the squares need to be sort of pointing away from the centre. So it's the background that makes the sort of the nought, if you like. And then those are what give us that facet shape. It makes a secondary pattern in the quilt. So let's sew those together, and then we'll just have a little look again at the one from the Noughts and Crosses quilt, and then you can sort of see the difference again with the colour placements. So there's the two blocks. The whole quilt is just made up of those two blocks. So we just alternate. You can see from the quilt behind me, it just goes snowball block, 9 patch, snowball block, 9 patch, and then the row underneath will start with the 9 patch and then snowball. And then this is where you get your secondary pattern of those sort of facet shapes coming into the quilt. So that's as simple as that one is. Really nice, another really good scrappy project, but you could absolutely do it with sort of a jelly roll. So there were our Noughts and Crosses blocks. And then these are our ones, I'm going to turn it that way because it looks a bit better to my eye, for the Facets quilt. So you can just see we've just switched where the colour placement is in that, and also in here, instead of having the cross, we've got that with the coloured fabrics there. So if you can make one of those quilts, you can definitely make the second quilt as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you give it a go. If you do, please do share your photos with us. We love to see what you're all out there making. So thank you once again, and I hope you'll join us here next time in the sewing studio.